Thank you. Oh, bless your hearts. Good night. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you all. Melinda, great to have you here. Thank you for coming. We love having you here in East Texas, and it's great to be with you. And I am going to a Wounded Warrior event from here. But I tell you, these are interesting times, aren't they? And they're the kind of times where you either step up and make a difference and change the direction off the road to the dustbin of history, or you just keep on that path and you go into oblivion. And people remember this once great country, greatest in history, that got too apathetic from those who could make a difference and left it to those who were determined to take it off course, away from its founding, away from its moorings, and that they ended up having their way. It's going to happen. I'd rather it happen 200-300 years from now instead of now. But that's up to us. And somebody mentioned earlier, it got play on Fox News 2 or 3 times. My comment to President Bush, this was the first stimulus bill back January of 2008. I didn't care who was president. It wasn't a good idea. And the $160 billion stimulus package had committed $40 billion of that to go as rebates to people that didn't pay any tax. And I didn't realize the microphone was open and was going to pick me up, but as President Bush left the floor after the State of the Union address, I asked him, by the way, Mr. President, how do you give a rebate to people that didn't put any bait in? And he's going, oh, anyway. So apparently John Stossel has been playing that some the last couple of weeks, but it's still true because it's not a rebate. And we are moving dangerously close to the point where less than 50% pay all the income tax. You don't get the country back once you arrive at more than 50% paying no income tax and voting. When one more than half of the voters pays no income tax, but they get federal benefits, absent a miraculous event from God, you don't get the country back. You're done. History records that over and over. Now, nobody has ever had the kind of republic, democratic republic like we have, to the extent that we do. But one of the problems, too, is so many people misunderstand and misinterpret Scripture, for example. I know over and over I've heard Democrats bring up on the House floor that, Jesus said we're supposed to help the poor, and you guys are just out to help your rich friends, which wasn't true and isn't true, but they kept saying it. Jesus said help the widows and orphans, and you guys don't care about them. You only care about your rich friends. Not true, but they still said it. And on one occasion when we were debating the tax rate, nobody was addressing all this Scripture was being thrown up at us. And so I went over to the guy managing the time and I said, I understand Ways and Means has all the rest of the time, but nobody's addressing all this Scripture. Can you carve me out a minute to do that? He said, yeah, that'd be great. So we'll cut out some time here and there and I'll get you a minute. So they recognized the gentleman from Texas, and I pointed out I appreciate any time anybody quotes Scripture on the floor of the House. Because for the first 150 years of our country's existence, most of the time when people filed a bill and they were really pushing it, they would use a verse of Scripture to justify why it was a good idea. That people used to do that. That's how we got started, despite some of the rewriting of history that's going on. But I said anyway to the House floor, and there were a lot of people there at that point, and I said, you know, nobody's more deeply touched than I am to keep hearing all this Scripture being quoted on the House floor. This is wonderful. But Jesus never said, go ye therefore, use and abuse your taxing authority, take somebody else's money and give. He said, you do it with your own money. That was the point. That was the point. And I said, and I'll leave you with this final example. because the minute goes really fast, y'all, for me. You know, I've told them we need to change the rules where we're not given a time deadline, we're given a word deadline. Because some of those guys from New York can go too fast and I can't keep up. But anyway, so my time is running out. I said, let me leave you with this final example. You know what Zacchaeus did after he met Jesus? He went and cut taxes. I yield back. And anyway, I didn't even get into the fact that he actually gave a 4-to-1 rebate, you know, after he met Jesus. But there is so much misunderstanding about the biblical basis for government and what its role is. And I never try to impose my religious beliefs on other people because of my position, but I just felt like it's important. If you're here and you're not a Christian, this is not addressed to you. You're doing great. Thank you for helping. You're doing a wonderful job. But for people who are Christians and they don't understand, or have friends that don't understand, you need to explain to them what I used to have to do when I was a district judge in Tyler, and people would come up and say, well, I can't serve on jury duty because I'm a Christian. And I would explain, well, my job is not to try to change your religious beliefs, but I am required by law to find out the depth of your beliefs to see if you're actually legally disqualified. And so I would point out or ask, do you believe the New Testament? And they would generally say, well, yes, of course. I told you I was a Christian. Well, I needed to ask, well, do you think Matthew is an appropriate part of the New Testament? Well, of course. And well, you know, in Matthew, Jesus said, if you say raca to your brother, you'll answer the courts. Because back then, it was an offense to slander someone like that, and you would answer the courts. And the point of the verses were generally that you'd answer the Father in heaven for what's in your heart. But still, Jesus recognized in an orderly society, to avoid anarchy, you're going to need to have courts. You're going to need to have a government to protect the country. And if you go on over to Romans 13, if you believe Romans 13 is supposed to be there, well, yes, of course. Well, it makes very clear that no government exists without God allowing it, without His authority. And in fact, it says the government basically is God's minister. So that if you do evil, it uses these words, if you do evil, be afraid, because God doesn't give the government the sword in vain. And so I would explain to them, in this country, the way the government's set up, you're the government. And when you get a jury notice, you're the government and the sword has been put in your hand. And you are the judge. Was this some evil conduct? And does it need to be punished? And if so, how much? You're the government. And if you read the writings of our founders, you find out they were so excited. The July 4th, when the 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was made public, it was such a big deal. Because, and you can read their journals and their letters, like those from the one from John Adams to his wife Abigail, because they talked about how they had within their grasp the chance to govern themselves like no one before. They said, you know, philosophers have only dreamed about what we have within our grasp. This is our chance to govern ourselves. Yes, England had a parliament, but they had an unelected king, and he could do basically whatever he wanted, and if he had enough gall, then there was nothing Parliament could do about it. Yes, in ancient Rome there was a Senate, but the Caesar pretty much did what he wanted. This was a chance in America that people could be their own government. And ever so often, you'd have a hiring day where the government, the people, are supposed to go hire people who have applied for the job, and they were supposed to have analyzed the applications, talked to the applicants, tried to figure out who would be the best servant to serve and do what they tell them to, because the people are the government. And those hiring days we call voting days, election day. It's a hiring day. And for far too long in this country, too many wonderful people have just believed this thing was going to stay on track all by itself. And you could stay home and watch football games, which I love, or just go out with your family, do different things, and the government, as long as they'll leave us alone, everything's going to be fine. And they found out when they didn't participate in hiring day, and they didn't accept the sword that was put in their hand, and when people would find out there's really nobody good that's applied for this job, maybe I ought to be the one to apply because it's too important not to get a good person in that job as servant. When people were not doing that, we got in trouble. And we got people who were more interested in serving themselves than they were in being servants. And we got in trouble. Now, I think there was something to what George Washington said in his farewell address when he warned to beware of political parties. They could get this country in trouble. Well, the way it's shaked out now, the way it's been shaken out, you have to be part of a political party to have a chance to get elected to a major office. It's just the way it is. We have to play with the rules the way we find them. And that's the way it is now. But one of the things that scares me about the Republican Party right now is not that we have a chance of winning the majority in the House of Representatives, but I think Republicans get one more chance at this. One more chance at a majority. And if Republicans get too caught up in trying to be political instead of just doing the right thing, and I've been sick of hearing people say, well, we got to be careful to do the politically right thing. You do the right thing. And it may cost you politically at first, but in the end, it's always the best way to go. And we've gotten too far away from that. But let me bring you back to reality, too, when it comes to political parties. This year is going to determine, this election is going to determine to a large extent the congressional elections of 2012. Now, Tea Parties have been great, and I believe they're helping get America back on track. And the guy on MSNBC, I won't even bother to call his name, but he likes to pick people as who he thinks are the worst person in the world. And I've had that honor at least a couple of times I know of. And the last time, the segment he played to justify my being the worst person in the world it was accurately portrayed. I was speaking to a Tea Party group in Washington. Michelle Bachmann had organized and asked me to speak to them. And I pointed out that it's projected this year that all of the income tax will probably be paid by around 53% of the American adults. And I said, and this was at the end of August, but I pointed out that actually we are told by recent polls that 28% of American adults identify with the Tea Party movement. Well, y'all, if you've been paying attention, you find out it's now a lot higher than that. But my point at the time was 28% of all the American adults in America identify with Tea Party movement. 53% of all American adults are paying all the income tax. I said, do the math. Do you think that over half of all the Tea Party people, or that over half of all those that are going to pay the income tax are Tea Party people? And the crowd screamed, yeah, and that made me the worst person in the world because I pointed that out somehow. But it's true, and it's one of the things that gives me great hope. Over half of the people that are going to pay all the income tax this year are alerted that there's a problem in America and we could lose the greatest country in the history of mankind. And that gives me encouragement. But it's not enough to turn out this time, because how many people turn out and how many people vote and how many people vote for the right party's candidate is going to determine which party will have the majorities in 2012. because this election will determine redistricting.